Copperson, Chapter 16, Teenie and Tidbit. Polly entered the shack, not knowing what to expect. The slave girl, who was about the same height as Polly, followed hesitantly behind her. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she looked around. It was just one room, barely large enough to turn around in, made of rough wooden planks. It held a small wooden table, a chair, one bed, and a straw mat on the dirt floor. It smelled faintly of sweat. "I've lived in places much worse," Polly said to the slave girl, who had already sunk to the floor and curled her arms tightly around herself. She thought back to the damp and moldy shack she shared with her mother while her father was in prison, in the attic room at Jeremy Carton's place. The slave girl whispered words that Polly could not decipher. "You better quit talking that jungle talk," Polly admonished. "I'm pretty sure that would be frowned upon in this place." She scowled as she looked at the confused expression on the girl's dark face. "I don't know what Mr. Derby is thinking. How am I supposed to make you civilized?" Polly looked closely at the slave. Her cheeks were sunken into her thin face, which made her eyes seem very large, like a deer's. When the two girls exchanged glances, Polly could see bitterness flash in the slave girl's eyes for a moment. Her lips were full, but her nose was tiny, almost like Polly's own. Polly was unaccustomed to being close to a Negro, and she marveled at how dark and mysterious the girl's face looked. A thin sheen of sweat covered the slave's slim body. Her hair, thick and matted, obviously had not been brushed in a long time. Welts and bruises, some of them quite recent, covered her arms and legs. Polly's stomach suddenly growled, and she pressed her hands against it. When had she last eaten? The slave girl watched Polly carefully, then grabbed her own stomach. "Well, I suppose you're hungry too," Polly said. "You have no idea what I'm saying, do you?" The girl just stared at her. "This is impossible," Polly shouted, and the slave cringed. "What am I doing out here in a shack taking care of some savage?" Furious with frustration, she pummeled the lumpy straw mattress with her fist until she was out of breath. "What am I supposed to do with you?" The girl shrugged as if she understood. Polly sat down heavily in the wobbly wooden chair and ran her fingers through her own uncombed hair. Her stomach growled again. "I suppose we must start somewhere," she said with a sigh. "Hungry," she said, rubbing her own stomach. "Hungry." Polly put her fingers to her mouth and moved her lips as if she were eating. "Hungry. Eat," she said, not expecting a response. The slave girl looked around cautiously, then, to Polly's utter surprise, said quite clearly, "Hungry. Eat." Polly looked at her suspiciously. "Either I'm a very good teacher, or you are not as stupid as you look. Eat food," Polly said, adding a new word. The slave girl repeated the phrase easily. "Well," Polly said, with the look of amazement on her face, "I'm just going to talk to you as if you understand and teach you new words as we get to them. I imagine the sooner I complete this task, the sooner I can be assigned some more respectable duties, like sewing or serving the lady of the house." The slave girl stared up at her. "From what Mr. Derby told me, this place is called Derbyshire Farms," Polly began. "It is a rice plantation. Can you say plantation?" Polly repeated the last word slowly. "Plantation." "Plantation," the girl repeated. Although she certainly hadn't expected this, Polly refused to show the girl any encouragement. "I am Polly, and I work for Mr. Derby, just like you." She hesitated, then added, "Well, not exactly just like you. You're a slave, which means you belong to him." "Slave," the girl said clearly. Her eyes narrowed and her lips drew back fiercely over her teeth as she said the word. She knows exactly what that word means, Polly thought. "Let's do something easier, like introductions," Polly said, trying to change the subject. "I am Polly," she said, pointing to herself. "Polly." "Polly." "Yes," Polly said, allowing herself a smile. "And you are Mina. Can you say Mina? It's your new name." She pointed to the girl on the floor. "Mina." The slave girl shook her head. "Amari," she said with pride, pointing to herself. I warned you about talking those African words, Polly reminded the girl. You are Mina. Mina. She said it clearly, several times. No, Mina. The slave girl frowned and shook her head forcefully. Amari. She said it again slowly. Amari. Polly sighed and said, Amari. Amari smiled at her for the first time. Amari, she said again. Well, Amari, the master and his son say your name is Mina, so you better learn that one since it looks as though there's not much chance you'll ever get back to Africa. Just like I'll probably never get back to Beaufort, she said, almost to herself. Not that I want to. The door of the cabin burst open then, and the shortest, skinniest black woman Polly had ever seen pushed her way through the door. She barely came to Polly's shoulder, but she carried herself with the dignity of a giant. Hiding behind her skirts was a very small boy, about 3 or 4 years old, who clung to her leg like a little insect. Well, ain't this the berries? What we got here? She boomed, even though the 2 girls were sitting right in front of her. Finally, Polly said timidly, How do you do? I'm Polly, and this here is Mina. I know who you is, the little woman said with a smile. I know everything. Hiding stuff from me is like trying to put socks on a rooster. You want to know the dirt going on around here? Just ask old Teenie. Tiny little Teenie. Then she erupted into a full, hearty laugh that didn't seem possible to Polly, considering how small the woman was. And this here is my boy Tidbit. The child retreated farther behind his mother, but he peeked out to see the new faces. Pleased to meet you, Miss Teenie, Polly said with difficulty. She didn't think a Negro deserved the title of Miss, but somehow this woman seemed to require it. Her father had taught her to disrespect Negroes, but her mother had taught her to respect her elders. Don't be calling me Miss Teenie less'n you want to get us both in trouble, gal. Just Teenie be fine. Y'all hungry? She asked, with a broad grin that showed she had almost no teeth. Y'all both about as thin as a bat's ear. Hungry, Amari whispered. Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit. The little African can speak a little English, huh? Don't let the master know, gal. Play dumb as long as you can. With that, she turned and headed out the door, but her child right behind her. Come on to the kitchen. I'll set you up with some victuals. Lordy me, she said. Now we got South African and a dentured gal to keep track of. She walked toward a small building just off the big white house so quickly that Amari and Polly had to trot to keep up with her. The child Tidbit scurried next to his mother, and a small brown dog scampered up to join them. Smoke snaked from the chimney of the cookhouse, and the smells of stewing pork and fresh bread wafted from its narrow door. Enticed by the smells, Polly eagerly entered the room. A stone hearth made up the entire back wall. A huge pot hung over the fire, which held a delicious-smelling sauce bubbling within it. How did this tiny little woman lift that heavy kettle? Polly couldn't help but wonder. Cooking pans and long utensils that she had never seen before hung from spikes nailed into the wall. She saw jugs and pointed sticks and even some utensils made from gourds. The floor was hard-packed dirt. In a matter of minutes, Teenie had 2 steaming bowls prepared for the 2 girls. Polly took a seat at a bench and motioned to Amari to do the same. Polly picked up her spoon and noted with disgust that Amari put her hand into the bowl and greedily scooped the food into her mouth. Table manners, she mentally added to the long list of impossible tasks ahead of her. Tidbit sat with them, eyes large with questions. His bare feet swung beneath him. The dog curled quietly underneath the table. Polly smelled the food, then tasted it. Brown peas, flavored with salt pork maybe, mashed with onions into yellow rice, Polly thought. Looks bad, tastes wonderful. This is very good, Polly said to Teenie between mouthfuls. What is it called? What's that you say, gal? You never had no hoppin' John? Ain't you got rice and peas and salt pork where you come from? Not like this, Polly admitted. My mother wasn't much of a cook. The old folks say that if you eat black-eyed peas on New Year's, it's supposed to make you rich for the new year, Teenie said. Then she added ruefully, Never worked for me, though. She laughed and scooped more into Polly's bowl. As Polly ate, she thought, with a smile, of her mother, who always managed to either undercook the spoon bread, burn the occasional rabbit or squirrel her father brought home, or forget to add spice to the stew. They ate lots of fried catfish, some of it quite raw, some of it crispy black. When her mother had fixed Hoppin' John, it was crunchy and gritty, obviously not cooked as long or as well as Teeny's meal. Polly glanced at the girl who insisted her name was Amari and saw that her thoughts were far from this warm kitchen as well. Tidbit watched every move the girls made. He giggled every time Amari stuffed her fingers into the bowl. "What's the dog's name?" Polly asked Tidbit. "Hush Puppy," the boy replied cheerfully as he reached down to hand the dog a scrap of bread. "He know how to hush and hide," the boy said proudly. "I'm going to give you two gals a couple of days to learn your way around here before I put you to work," Teeny told them as they finished eating. "And Tidbit, I done told you to keep that raggedy old dog out of my kitchen." The boy just laughed and disappeared under the table with the dog. "Come by here tomorrow and watch me work," Teeny continued. "That's the best way to learn. Just stay out of my way, 'cause I be busier than a stump-tailed cow in fly time. I fixes all the meals round here." Before Polly could respond, Teeny added, "Your job, Miss Polly, is to explain everything you see to this here African gal. Teach her the words, 'cause Massa ain't gonna wait no long time 'fore he be expecting her to hold her own. And Miss Africa, learn what words you can, but learn to keep your mouth shut, 'cause Clay, that hellhound, got less patience than his daddy." She grunted with distaste. "That boy got a thumping gizzard for a heart." "Yes'm," Polly mumbled. "Gal, where you from? I done told you about calling me ma'am and miss. Your mama done raised you right," she said with a grin. Tidbit giggled from under the table. "I'm from Beaufort in the Low Country," Polly explained. "Nothing much there but bugs and gators and a few folks scraping the dirt to make do. My mother is dead. My father as well." She swallowed hard. "Oh, child, how they die?" Teeny's face grew tender. Polly looked at her and saw that Teeny really wanted to know. "My father was born in England, and he was a good-looking man," she began. She smiled as she thought of his charming grin. "He told me ladies used to follow him home from the pubs every night. He would buy them fine wine and expensive gifts and tell them the lies they wanted to hear. He lived a grand life until he ran out of money." She paused. "He was thrown in jail like a common criminal just because he couldn't pay his debts." Teeny sucked in her breath but made no comment. He had friends in the court system, however, and he was given the chance to start over in the colonies as an indentured servant. "He came here on a prison ship, a frightful experience," he said. "Eventually, his indenture was sold to a man named Jeremy Carton in Beaufort, right here in Carolina Colony. That's where he met my mother, who put an end to his fondness for other ladies, but not, however, his affection for ale and wine. I was born there." The slave girl gently petted the dog under the table, looking if she was trying to follow the conversation. Polly continued, "My father worked like an ordinary slave on a tobacco farm." She looked up to see if Teeny had reacted to that, but Teeny simply continued to serve the food in the pot over the fire. She used a whisk that looked like it was made from the twig of a tree. "He worked hard, but he could never make enough to pay off his debt. My daddy was a good man, but not real careful with what little money he got. He drank too much sometimes." Polly shifted on the bench a little. "What about your mama?" Teeny asked gently. "My mother came up rough. She was an orphan. She was shuffled from family to family most of her childhood. She learned to make do for herself most of her life. She worked as a maid when she could, as a beggar when she couldn't." "Well, pick my peas. A white woman as a maid and a beggar? Must not be no slaves from where she come from," Teeny commented. "Not all white people are rich landowners," Polly said, almost coldly. "Most white folks I know scuffle for every scrap of food they get." "But they ain't slaves," Teeny reminded her quietly. "Go on, child." Polly thought for a moment and continued. "My father kept getting in trouble, spending months in jail, and was unable to pay back his indenture. My mother tried her best to keep us together as a family, even signing on with Mr. Carton as an indenture herself. But there was never enough work or money or food, even though she offered to do other people's laundry after her work was done for Carton. Nobody would hire a white woman because folks knew they could get slaves to do the work for free." Polly tensed as she thought of the unfairness. Teeny took that moment to cut each girl a large slice of pumpkin pie. She cut a tiny piece for Tidbit, who stuffed most of it into his mouth in one bite, then grinned a large orange smile. The rest he gave to the dog. Well, the sun don't shine on the same dog's tail all the time, Teenie said philosophically. Everybody got hard times at one time or the other. I suppose, Polly began again, this time speaking very slowly. But then, 3 months ago, my parents came down with smallpox. Teenie stopped chopping the onions for a moment. Daddy died first, then 3 days later my mother. I nursed them both, and I never got as much as a pimple. She paused, stood up, and walked outside of the hot cookhouse, taking deep breaths. I am not going to cry, she sternly told herself. When she felt she could continue, she went back into the kitchen. So how you end up here, gal? Teenie rattled a stack of 10 plates. Mr. Jeremy Carton decided that I must sign on to pay back what my parents owed him, and I had no choice but to do it. His is just a small dirt farm, so I suppose to prevent me from running off, and I would have too, he took me with him to Charlestown to get supplies yesterday. But then he met Mr. Derby in a tavern, and he somehow sold my indenture to him. I'm not sure how or why, so here I am. 7 years to pay back your indenture ain't bad, Teenie pointed out. You was young and got plenty of time to make you a place in this here world. White women with indentures got it easy. Eventually, you can fit in. Polly glanced over at Teenie, surprised at the emotion in her voice. Teenie poked furiously at the coals in the hearth. I must pay back 14 years, Polly told her. I must pay my own, plus what was left of my parents' indentures. Mr. Derby says I should be glad he was willing to take on all that debt. I suppose I should be thankful, but I'm 15 years old. By the time I pay him back, I'll be almost 30, a wrinkled old woman. She stared for a long time at the blazing embers in Teenie's fireplace. 30 ain't so old, Teenie said quietly. That's close to how old I be, far as I can tell. She gazed out the door of the small kitchen house and looked dreamily down the path that led away from the plantation. Polly watched as Amari moved close to Teenie and touched her hand. Something seemed to pass between them, a look of understanding, perhaps. Amari whispered a few words in her own language. Teenie moved away abruptly and returned to her brisk command of the room. Go on now. You two gals get out of here. It be almost dark, and I expect you both at dawn. Tidbit, go fetch me some wood for my fire, and take that dog with you, she yelled, although she didn't seem angry. The boy disappeared into the yard. Amari and Polly headed slowly back to the little cabin. Polly watched, amazed, as Amari rushed to grab the mat on the floor, shook it out, then curled up on it quickly. Why are you laying on the floor? Amari covered her head with her arms. You don't want to sleep in the bed? Again, the slave girl ignored her. Polly shrugged and climbed onto the narrow cot. The straw-filled mattress was lumpy and smelled of moldy vegetables, but it was better than anything she'd have felt in a long time. She slept. The knock on the door startled Polly awake. It was Tidbit, looking like a tiny night spirit. He was shivering, and so was his dog. Master Clay say he want his birthday present now. I'm to take her there. Polly gasped with realization and reached over to shake Amari awake. Amari sat up and looked from Polly to the trembling child. Her face was a question. Polly said slowly and with genuine sorrow, You must go with Tidbit. Master Clay is asking for you. Amari looked at Polly, then the child, and suddenly seeming to understand, she groaned. No, 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 she begged. Polly touched her arm, but couldn't think how to help her. Tidbit stood silently, shifting from foot to foot, looking very uncomfortable. Amari finally took a deep breath, stood up without a word, and followed the child out the door. The night was very dark.